Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Supercharge Your CV, Essential Skills for Aspiring Solicitors with BARBRI. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. This event is going to run from 4 until 5:30 p.m. The first hour will be a Q&A session, which will feature some of the questions that you, our audience, have submitted in advance. And if time permits, we'll also be taking spontaneous questions from the live chat. So please leave any questions you might have for our speakers in the comment tab on the right-hand side of your screen. And before you leave your comment, please do make sure you've set your chat to stage so we can read them. In the second hour, there'll be a virtual networking session over in the expo booths. So make sure you hang around to chat with our speakers and ask all your burning questions directly. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. My name's Lydia Fonts. I'm a writer and researcher at Legal Cheek, and I'll be chairing this discussion this afternoon. And I'm very lucky to be joined by 4 speakers today. We have Roy Morgan, a senior tutor at BARBRI, Holly Moore, a legal advisor in the brand protection team at ITV, Jacob Sexton, an early careers specialist at Brabner's, and Elliot Mack, trainee solicitor at Baker McKenzie. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to introduce us to their career journeys and who they are. Roy, if I could come to you first, could you give us an idea of your career journey and how you got to where you are today?
Well, my journey started a long time ago, I suspect before some of the other panelists were even born. But yes, I am a solicitor, of course. I am a solicitor advocate. I have my higher rights, which I've had since the bar lost their monopoly, and that was 29 years ago. But I started in practice in Cardiff in a firm that was then called Phillips & Buck, that became the Cardiff branch of Eversheds. And that was a route that I didn't intend to go down. I didn't want to be a small fish in a big pond. So I broke away, although I was a partner then, I broke away with one of the offices that I'd been running and set up my own practice, which I ran for, I'll say it carefully, 30 years. We grew fairly significantly. We had 5 offices across South Wales and an office in London. But alongside running the practice, I freelanced for about 25 years with Altior as it was, BARBRI Altior, as it became a BARBRI now, conducting predominantly advocacy courses, because I became the lead advocacy trainer with BARBRI. And so whilst I freelanced for that length of time, about 10 years ago, my life changed quite dramatically. Whilst I was based in Cardiff, my wife, who's an Italian commercial lawyer, was based in London. And we were running back and forth like fools. And despite the colour of my hair, I have a 10-year-old daughter, so that changed priorities a bit. And my arm was twisted to take a more permanent role within BARBRI, which I did. But it had to be London-based, so that suited perfectly. So I now do even more training for BARBRI than I used to do as a freelancer. Predominantly, as I say, advocacy courses, but a lot of business management type courses, things like business development and networking, time and stress management, those sort of courses. But I have a nice arrangement because I can still do a small amount of court work that I'm instructed to do that I can fit in around a fairly busy training schedule. And now very heavily involved in some courses we'll be talking about a little later on.
Thank you very much. And Holly, could I come to you next? Can you give us an idea of your career journey so far and the type of work you do today?
Yes, of course. So my legal career started 8 years ago when I was 18, fresh out of college. So just after finishing my A-levels, I started at ITV as the first in-house solicitor apprentice in the UK, which is a mouthful. So that was back in 2016. And after receiving an offer for that role, I kind of dropped all of my other plans. I knew that I wanted to become a lawyer, but chose a slightly different route via the solicitor apprenticeship, which I think we'll talk a bit more about later. But I started in the September, just after finishing my exams, and moved around all of ITV's legal teams over 6 years. So it was a kind of 6-year structured scheme. And for the first 4 years, I worked in ITV's legal teams. So I think I worked in the commercial team, focusing on kind of airtime sponsorship deals. Then I moved to production. So all of the contracts and agreements that are needed to get a production up and running, and global licensing, and also commissioning. So that was my first kind of 4 years. And while I was doing that and moving around the legal teams, I was studying towards my law degree. So I studied 1 day a week and worked 4 days a week. and I studied with City University of London, and that was the apprenticeship provider as well. So once I'd finished my degree in 2020, I went straight into the SQE, which I'm sure we'll get quite a few questions about as well. So I took both first sittings of SQE1 and SQE2 after completing BARBRI's prep courses, again as part of the apprenticeship, and that followed the same kind of structure of working 4 days a week and studying for 1 day a week. During that final 2 years, I also completed a secondment into private practice. So I did a trainee swap and moved into private practice for 6 months just to get some private practice experience before qualifying, because I thought that was really important to kind of see the other side after working in-house for kind of 5 years at that point. And as I say, that was while studying for SQE1 and SQE2. Took the exams, was super lucky, passed them, and qualified as a solicitor 2 years ago. So I'm now 2 years PQE. When I qualified, I moved into ITV's brand protection team. So we focus on ITV's IP portfolio globally. So all of our trademarks, IP disputes, litigation, clearances, and also a little bit of licensing as well. So really, really broad, kind of exciting role for me to move into. And I spent the kind of last year of my apprenticeship working in the team. So it was quite a nice transition to move into an NQ role there. And that's me now. And then kind of outside of my day-to-day role, I also sort of stay involved with BARBRI. I've sat on their advisory board for the last year. So working on SQE matters and kind of giving perspective of someone who has been through the SQE and kind of giving out as much information and experiences as possible. And I also run that law blog on Instagram, which is a kind of an Instagram account that I started just as I started doing the SQE and studying for the SQE, which I realised at the time not very much information was available and no one was really documenting their experience. So I kind of got up the courage to start my own Instagram account and start a sort of blog of my journey. And it's carried on. So it's kind of 4 years old now. And now I document kind of life as a junior lawyer and still put out quite a lot of SQE and apprenticeship content as well.
Thank you so much, Holly. Can I come to you next, Jacob, to tell us about what you do?
Yes, of course. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Sexton, and as it says there, I'm the early career specialist at BARBRI. My career journey has been a bit of an odd one. I have done lots of different things, in all honesty. Started out actually doing carpentry on a building site, which is very bizarre. Whilst I was at college, realised that I'm definitely not the best at any form of manual labour, and decided to do a law degree in Manchester. So I studied that from 2016 to 2019. God, I've just shown my age, haven't I? And whilst I was there, I actually realised that law wasn't for me, which is an odd one. It's a great career, but it wasn't for me in the end. But studied my law degree, like I said, here for 3 years. And after that, I ended up staying in hospitality for a bit. Ended up being a sales and events manager, so organising literally events and do's for restaurants and things. Then decided that also wasn't for me and did another flip and went into education. So I actually worked for the University of Law for a period of time. The first role was in the kind of like a student union capacity. So I was all about kind of enhancing the student experience across all of the campus locations, basically. So it was predominantly a project-based role where I was essentially getting feedback from people on their experiences and then kind of putting in place tangible plans to better that experience and change things for the students at the uni. After that, I then kind of transitioned into an operational role at the University of Law as well. So I worked within support services and I looked after all the operations behind the Disability Support and Inclusion Service. So this is where I really kind of learned loads about, you know, diversity, inclusion, all the work that goes into DEI, but also the background behind kind of adjustments and support at university. Whilst doing those jobs as well, I always had a really keen interest in, the progression of legal careers and the industry itself. So I did work on various programs. So I was part of the program approval panels for anything new that the university wanted to kind of launch. So I was involved in bringing the new SQE courses to market and kind of on the back end of the design of those. And then also at the same time working on various success projects, so about getting students, once they've completed university, then actually into the legal world, actually into employment, so working on various employability projects as well. And then one day I kind of realized that, again, maybe I want something new. So then I fell into early careers as another new start. As you can tell, there's a theme here that I like to move around a lot, but I am now settled in a career. I can say that very confidently. So I started my journey working at a Magic Circle law firm in London, where I was the early careers recruitment specialist. So in my role there, it was predominantly a marketing and attraction role. So it was all about being on campuses, getting people to hear about the firm, upskilling people, for example, like today, talking about how to make the best of your CVs. It was all about raising brand profile and giving back to students so they knew who we were as a firm and hopefully then wanted to come and work for us. After then, I'm now in Manchester again, full-time, and I've joined a firm called BARBRI, which is a firm based in the north of England. So we've got 4 offices kind of around Leeds, Liverpool, Lancashire and Manchester, and I look after the full early careers life cycle at the firm here. So that is essentially the end-to-end program management for anyone that's a trainee solicitor, apprentice, intern, anyone on Silex. It all kind of sits under me. So responsible for the initial kind of attraction and recruitment of those people, then selecting them, hiring them onto program. And then whilst you're on program, it's my job to make sure that anyone there can successfully qualify at the end of it by doing all sorts of L&D activity, working with the trainees and apprentices and so forth to basically build the best experience. So yeah, it's definitely an odd one. And people always say, how on earth did you end up here? But I love the role I do because I get to work with so many people. I'm constantly interacting with my trainees, speaking to them, building better experiences, working on all sorts of projects to make things the best they can be. And I just love that I found a career where I can do a different thing every day, because one day's marketing, the next day's recruitment, the next day's HR business partnering. It's all very mixed up. So yes, that's me in a long nutshell.
Thank you very much, Jacob. That sounds brilliant. Next, I'll come to Elliot. Can you tell us about where you've been and where you are now?
Sure. Thanks. First of all, thanks a lot, Lydia. Appreciate it. And also, Holly and Jacob, your career paths sound fascinating. Mine's probably a little bit more towards the Jacob end, in the sense that it was a bit of a roundabout journey, ending up as a trainee solicitor. I think the starting point probably best to go with university, or I guess a few of the viewers here are at the moment. So I studied history at university, which was quite a while ago, started in 2013. I finished in 2016 without a clue at all what I wanted to do with my career. I think it's pretty fair to say that I wasn't necessarily the most career focused at the time. So I took pretty much the first job that came to me, which was working in sales, technology sales. And it turned out to be a great time to work in technology sales. It was when there was a cloud revolution first coming in as a service. And I had a fantastic time. Fast forward 4 years in that career, I made some great friends, had some amazing experiences. I was well compensated for my work, and I was co-managing a team of 9 people, despite being 24 at the time, which was amazing. However, for all the benefits of that role, it was not the most intellectually stimulating job. So I had a bit of a Damascene conversion, I think it's fair to say, and ended up doing a master's in international politics, which was very left field from tech sales, which I absolutely loved. And the idea was then to go on and do something in the international remit. Unfortunately, my master's spanned across the years of 2019 and 2020, which was when COVID hit us. And so any and everything international was a no-go, unfortunately. So once I finished my master's, the role I fell into was working for an environmental science company, which again was very, very rewarding, incredible. I started off working for doing some of the charity work for them. They were looking to set up a nature centre for sort of disadvantaged kids in urban areas, and ended up working in a wider project management role for them, which involved working on large infrastructure projects and helping manage the delivery of them. A certain large railway, which did not quite make it all the way from Birmingham down to London, was one of those. But also some very interesting wind farm projects, which are incredible. But again, at the time for me, that role was one in which I would never be sort of an expert and really get to tangle with the issues themselves. But instead, I was sort of the facilitator, the project manager. And so I thought, you know, let's spin the dice again and try another career. I was sort of looking for different things to do, and law had always been something which had appealed to me. It used quite a lot of the skills which I thought I had. And by this point, I was in my sort of mid to late 20s. And so I had a few friends who were already either trainee solicitors, associates, or a couple of even barristers at the time, which was incredible. And so I relied on my network. I spoke to my friends, understood a bit more about the career itself, and then coming on to probably the interesting bit for most people, how did I get a training contract without any legal work experience? We'll get onto that in a bit more depth later on. But it was certainly interesting having to buffer my CV with legal work experience whilst I was still in full-time employment at a later date, upon which vacation schemes weren't necessarily accessible for me. And then how I understood and saw the legal offering in terms of firms and ways into the career as well. So, I mean, the two big things there are how do you get the work experience, how do you demonstrate your passion for law, and then research. And I've got to thank Legal Cheek for a lot of that, actually, because the amount of time I spent looking through his Legal Cheek pages was significant. So after I decided to make the application process, I actually narrowed it down through that research to about 5 to 10 firms, which I was going to apply for. And I think you've got to be quite judicious in the firms you decide to pick. The things I was looking for were sort of multi-jurisdictional work. I've always been a bit of a traveller. I come from sort of a very mixed background as well. My mum's in the Caribbean, my dad's half English, half Japanese. I've always seen the world internationally. I love expanding my horizons, experiencing other cultures. And so I knew I wanted to work somewhere that had that real multi-jurisdictional offering. Went through the application process, which, you know, is fairly daunting for any and everyone. Had the assessment centres, the partner interviews, and thankfully I got an offer from Baker McKenzie, which I was over the moon about because it was one of my sort of first choices. And then the long wait began. So I got my offer in April 2022. And I only started last month, so September 2024. So I had a good 2.5 years in between receiving the offer and then actually beginning as a trainer. So what did I do in that time? Well, I finished up with the job that I was currently with. I went traveling for a while across Southeast Asia with my partner, now my fiance, and then moved to New Zealand to start the SQE process. And that's where I first bumped into BARBRI. And I've got to say, working at BARBRI for the SQE was fantastic. The flexibility they offered. I was working with a 13-hour time difference, so quite literally the other side of the world, and it was flexible enough for me to do well and pass my SQE1 and SQE2 both on the first attempts. So after I finished, came back to the UK for my SQE2, had my exams over here, and I've been in the UK since. So I said I started with Baker McKenzie last month. My first seat rotation, I'm in the banking and finance division, working on specifically trade finance. So my supervisor, a partner and senior associate in trade finance, and how trade finance works effectively is it's working on financings, so loan deals across to typically sovereign states for funding large infrastructure projects, generally large infrastructure projects, but it can be other projects as well. So the importing of medicines, for instance. So some of it is definitely feel good work as well. It's hard work, but it is good work. And yeah, I'm very happy with the career choices I've made. Although again, it was a very roundabout route. It's gotten me here, and yeah, the work is very exciting for now.
Thank you so much, Elliot. That's an absolutely fascinating journey. And I'd like to introduce as well Aaron Sahota, a trainee solicitor at Vincent & Elkins, who's just joined the session. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'll just hand over to you now to give us an introduction to your career so far and what you do today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi everyone on the call. Thank you for having me as well. Yeah, my name's Aaron. If I take you back to the start of my journey, it would be studying law at university, even before Jacob actually. So I studied in 2012 to 2015. So I'm really old. And after I studied law at university, I realized that I wanted to do something a bit different. I think, like Elliot, I perhaps wasn't so careers focused at that point in my life. So I decided to still join a great firm, but I joined Deloitte because I thought that Deloitte would give me a variety of experiences in terms of clients and type of work that I did. So I really enjoyed working for Deloitte, worked in financial services projects, did some work on early versions of artificial intelligence as well. So I did that for about 3-4 years, did a bit of traveling too, which was very good and enjoyable. And then after 3-4 years, I realized that I wanted to challenge myself in a new way, which I feel like is a bit of a trend with everyone on this panel. Perhaps curiousness is a common theme. And so I realized that one thing I hadn't really had working at Deloitte was an understanding of people being in really high pressure situations, challenging myself in more of a practical way. So I decided to actually join the police service for 2 years, where I worked on a scheme called Police Now, which is a scheme where they bring in graduates to put them in essentially difficult areas in the UK, and you have to solve problems that have been going on in that area for a long time. So the area I was in had a lot of drug issues, and I don't want to say gang and big it up, but it was like groups of kids that were arguing with each other, shall we say. So I did a bit of frontline policing work, a bit of detective work, had a great time, a great life experience. But then ultimately I considered that it wasn't really what I wanted to do long term as a career. And so thankfully, Deloitte invited me back to on promotion. So I went back to Deloitte as a manager in 2019 and did that for 1 year. And then when I was at Deloitte the second time, I carried out some work in the commercial contracts department on a construction project. So I was working with lawyers, with other people at Deloitte that had experience in that particular area, and I started to get a flavor of what being a lawyer might be like. Obviously it's very different in practice, but it was the most closely related thing that I'd done up to that point. And so after a year I thought to myself, well, I don't really see myself being at Deloitte long term. And I think the one thing that really got to me about Deloitte, and I do recommend consulting to anyone that wants to do it, it's just that I found it hard to define who I was or what type of professional I was. And I thought if you're a lawyer, you're at least defined as being a lawyer and you have a skill set, you're a professional, you have to pass the SQE. And the fact that I'd done a law degree and the experiences I'd had up to that point made me feel that being a lawyer would be probably the most appropriate professional route to go down. So after 1 year at Deloitte, I applied to law firms. Thankfully, Vincent & Elkins was one of those law firms, and the application process at the same time as working was quite a difficult one. So I imagine that a few people on the call probably have to go through that as well. Managing my time, finding time to leave the office to go to a meeting, or taking annual leave to do my vacation scheme. These are things, I suppose, that we all go through when we're trying to get the job that we really want. And thankfully, then I went to the vacation scheme, was successful at the vacation scheme, was invited to the training contract where I am now, sitting in this great room, in this lovely office. And at the moment, I'm in the disputes team, so litigation and arbitration, working on disputes in the energy and construction sector. Really enjoying it. One thing I'll say to everyone on the call is, I don't know if you found the same, Elliot, but kind of the standard in law and the attention to detail and the cadence at which you learn things is on a different level, really, to any other career that I've had, you know, by far more than policing and by far more than Deloitte. But something I'm really, really enjoying. So, you know, anyone who's thinking of going into a career in law, I couldn't recommend it more, really. It will definitely make you a better person, personally and professionally. And yeah, I think that might be everything. So yeah, it's good to join the call and look forward to hearing some questions as well.
Thanks so much, Aaron. So I think it's fair to say that everybody on our panel this afternoon has a really diverse and rich set of experiences. And I'm sure you've all picked up a whole bunch of valuable skills during those experiences. So our first set of questions that we're going to kick off with are going to be all about the must-have skills for applicants to law firms. So just to open this up, what are the skills that employers are looking for in aspiring solicitors? I think, Jacob, this is your area very much, so I think I'll direct this to you first.
Thank you. So, oh goodness, there's so many skills that employers look for now, but I think what's important to recognize is that, like, for myself as a recruiter, I'm not looking for, like, for example, 3 set skills or 4 set skills, because what I need to do when I'm recruiting is create a balance in my cohort. So what I always say is don't worry too much about having to be a great team worker or having to be a great communicator, because there's always people in life that will balance those skills out for you. You can't be an expert at everything, and it's not a one size fits all kind of industry. We need a variety of strengths and skills to come through. So I always just say, whatever strengths you've got and whatever skills you've got, just bring those to the table, whatever they might be, because well, here's a good example. We always say in interviewing, do you consider yourself to be a proactive kind of person or a reactive kind of person? And a lot of people naturally say, oh, I'm very proactive, I like to plan ahead, blah, 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 blah. And then a question I always pose back is, well, you know, is reactive bad? Because if something gets put on your desk at 5 o'clock and it's an immediate deadline, needs to be done within the hour, you need to be able to react to that and work towards it. But then I appreciate that not all people are good at that. Not everyone can react in that scenario, but not everyone's that great at planning. But if you have on a team one person who's a great planner, one person who's a great person at reacting, they naturally balance each other out quite well. So it's all about just working on what you've got and bringing that to the table. So it kind of comes back to the strength, I guess, of the growth mindset view of things. It's about everything you do, just always try and be the best at that. So if you know you're really good at teamwork or you know collaboration, always be trying to work on that and develop that skill as much as you can, because an employer will really value you bringing that to the table. And you balance out someone like myself, who loves working independently, in all honesty. And my team will tell you that. I am an independent worker through and through, but there are other people around me to be great team workers for it to work. So just as long as you've got that growth mindset and can really work on your skills and want to be the best version of you with the skills you've got, then just bring those to the table. That's my best advice.
Thanks so much. That's really valuable advice. I'll come to Elliot next. So you've done your application process for your current role probably more recently than anybody else on the panel. So I'm interested to hear from you about the skills that were really important in that process, and what did you focus on?
Yes, thank you very much. So in terms of the skills, I think there's skills which sort of everyone expects of a solicitor, you know, an intellectual acumen to a certain degree, critical thinking, proficient communication skills, especially written communication skills as well. So make sure you check for those typos on all of your applications. And a big chunk of resilience. I think that's a key thing you probably need as a trainee. But I actually had a one-on-one with HR and graduate recruitment last week just to catch up. And I did pose this question to them, knowing that I was going to come and sit on this panel ahead of time. And they echoed a very similar thing to yourself, Jacob, where they said it's important to get a real range of skills and qualities. I mean, we've got balance, but they did say there's 2 things that really aren't necessarily skill-based, but are things that you should try and be demonstrating. And the first was an interest in law. So there are multiple ways anyone could demonstrate that interest in law. I think we've all demonstrated it through different paths, even on this panel. But an interest in law is absolutely non-negotiable, and you've got to be able to demonstrate that interest in law in your application, in whichever guise that may be. Whether it's a vacation scheme, whether you've attended some of these sessions, whether you've done virtual schemes, whether you've done any pro bono work or volunteering, there are multiple ways, and that's only a very short amount of them. The other big thing is research, especially on the firm. So researching that specific firm, you'd be surprised, and this holds not necessarily just for law and secure training contract, but for any profession and any company you're applying to. They will show what skills they're looking for specifically on their website, on their application, somewhere or another. It's incumbent upon you to do the research to understand what they're looking for and present what they're looking for, essentially. If maybe the things which you don't have aren't for it, maybe not the right fit for you, but there will be somewhere that is the right fit for you. So do your research, demonstrate you've done your research in your application, and show that you love law, and you can't go too far wrong.
Brilliant. And Roy, I'll come to you now. What's your perspective on the skills that employers are looking for? And additionally, how does BARBRI support students when they're developing these skills?
Right. Well, if that question was asked 10 years ago of employers, the answer I think we'd have received was good legal knowledge. That is now a given. Things have changed. And I'm not going to answer the question. I'm going to let a body of employers answer the question, because we commissioned quite a significant piece of research with multinational firms, regional firms, medium-sized firms, and so on. And they gave us the top 3 skills that employers are now looking for. And I think we'll see those on screen in a second. And the top of the list there, in fact, we can split these into 2 groups, I think. The first group is where there's a skills gap, and employers appreciate that there is a skills gap upon qualification, for reasons perhaps I'll talk about in a moment. But the skills gaps come into these 3 categories. Business acumen, first of all. And what we mean by that is appreciating the business consequences of your legal advice. Very often a client will present with a problem, and straight away you'll identify a legal solution for that problem. But is it in the best business interest for your clients? And they're not always the same. So it's being able to understand the bigger picture, I suppose. And then business development. And I think new lawyers often say, well, I'm not going to be involved in that for a few years into my career yet. Not so. From day one, you are the ambassador of your firm. You're part of a team, and you can build your firm's business just by your own connections, your own internal and external networking. So business development is quite a big skill they're looking for. And then commercial understanding. Clients will sometimes come in and say, I want this or I want that. But actually what they need might be something very, very different indeed. And being able to get behind what clients think they want and try and identify what they actually need to solve their problem or to make them complete their transaction, whatever it is you're dealing with. So those are the main gaps that our employers have identified. But what are the skills that they say will add value? And this mirrors some of the things that Jacob was saying just now to some extent, I think. Client relationships. There is quite a significant research that suggests that on average, 70% of new business coming into a firm comes from existing clients, either because of repeat business or referral from those existing clients. So maintaining those client relationships, absolutely crucial. And if you have that sort of skill, it really adds value. And then being a good team worker and being able to collaborate with a team probably goes without saying, I would think. But most importantly, communication skills, whether it's good written skills or good oral skills. I mentioned in the introduction that my life was spent in court, basically. Advocacy was my bag. And I've taught advocates at all levels for the best part of 30 years. And the message I always try to get across is advocacy isn't confined to the courtroom. It's communication. You can be in the boardroom negotiating that multi-billion-pound takeover deal, or in a tribunal down the road. You're using the same skills. You're presenting arguments, you're negotiating, you're challenging evidence, and so on. exactly the same skills we use in court, just employed in a different way. So there's a lot of business understanding, I think, as to what employers are looking for now, over and above the legal knowledge that's given.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting, and some great skills identified.
Sorry,
Jacob,
there was a second part to your question, I think.
Oh yes, there was indeed. So how does BARBRI support students in developing these skills?
Well, I gave a little hint just now, I think, but we identified very quickly, as did many of the firms that we work with, that the SQE gets you the qualification. It doesn't prepare you to use it. It doesn't prepare you for practice. So we set about creating a whole package of courses. One of them actually called Prep for Practice. It does what it says on the tin. And we worked with a number of firms, Elliott's being one of them, asking what do you want from your newly qualified, from your trainees, and from your solicitors, your junior associate solicitors. And it's sort of things I was just talking about: business development, commercial acumen, communication, and so on and so forth. So we've created a package of courses looking at those skills and addressing some of the skills gap I was talking about just now. I think later on we might see some of what we are now calling the legal life skills, which go above and beyond the SQE by some way. So we'll see a bit more about those later on. So basically, it's creating a whole package of courses that develop the skills that are not, to be frank, properly and fully addressed as part of the SQE.
It's very interesting. It's good, very good to know. It sounds like some valuable training that's going on. Further on these sort of skills and how students can develop them, but also how they can sort of utilize these skills in order to get where they want to go professionally. I'd like to ask you, Jacob. So you were speaking earlier about how what you need to do is identify your personal skills and sort of develop those and emphasize them. So how can students, when they're writing their application forms or putting together their CV, how can they showcase their skills in the best way?
So it obviously depends on what the firm is asking you to demonstrate and do, but typically there will be a section as part of an application form that asks, you know, around your skills and experiences, what you can bring to the table, essentially. The best way to always do it, I always say, do it in threes in terms of pick your top 3 skills. So what do you think that you are the strongest at? What do you think you're the most developed at? And then start exploring those in a bit more depth. You probably heard this a million times at university, college, or whatnot, but I always say the P method can never do you wrong in terms of point, explain, and apply, because what it allows you to do is then really effectively get across to the reader about how you are demonstrating that skill. So I would say identify the skills as starting points. So let's say, you know, you want to talk about, you like to think of yourself as having quite good resilience, for example. And then what you want to do is you want to demonstrate that through an explanation with an appropriate example. So we want to hear about a time where you have really demonstrated that you are a resilient person. And again, most firms these days, none of us actually look for experience in law most of the time. It's more about how you've developed skills kind of from a wide range of experiences. So it doesn't have to be just a work experience example. It doesn't have to be a part-time work experience example. It can be anything you've got that can really demonstrate that skill, but obviously pick one that's a solid one to use. And then just finish off by applying it back. So obviously you're applying for the role. Typically it might be a trainee solicitor position. Why is resilience important to that career? So you always have to think back to the position and why that skill you're demonstrating is going to be relevant for it. So, you know, as rightly mentioned earlier, I think, Elliot, you said about resilience being a key skill to the career. You work late nights, you do a lot of stuff. It's the nature of the world it's in. So it's important to demonstrate that you can bounce back and you can continue through challenge. So that would be my best advice for demonstrating it. So make your point. What skill is it going to be? Talk about that with a really good, valid experience, and then apply it back as to how it's going to be useful for the role you're applying for.
That's great. Thanks so much. And I'd like to come to Holly next. So working in-house at ITV, what are the skills that you think are specific to working in-house as opposed to in private practice, or are they all the same? What's your perspective on your career path and the skills that are central to your career?
So I think there are a lot of skills that are similar for in-house and private practice, especially going from in-house to private practice on my comment. I realised that there are a lot of similarities, but there are some quite big differences. And I think it comes down to kind of a few key skills. And I was actually making notes as the other speakers were talking, because they were sort of prompting my brain and thinking back to when I was training and when I was applying. And really a massive skill in-house is that kind of common sense and business thinking. So actually kind of thinking a little bit outside the box and not focusing necessarily on the black letter law, and not kind of flaunting legal knowledge, because really your client, who is your company, they really don't care. All they want to know is yes or no, can we do it? That's great that you have the legal knowledge, you definitely need it, but actually you don't need a massive email or a big letter or anything like that. They just want to know yes or no, can we do it? And they want it communicated in a way that they understand. So you have to remember that you're not working with lawyers day in, day out like you are in private practice. So that's a kind of key skill for both, but actually a key difference is the way that you're communicating. So I think communication is always going to be a huge skill, but the way that I've learned to communicate training in-house changes depending on who I'm talking to. So I could be talking to a lawyer from another team, in which case it might be, you know, a bit more legalese, a bit more detail. And then when I'm talking to production teams, or when I'm talking to kind of non-legal colleagues, either I explain myself a bit more, or I just withhold explanation, and let them know, you know, what they want to know in the way that they want to know it. So communication is a huge one for me. I think adaptability and flexibility as well. In-house, and I think it is the same in private practice, every day is very different, and you can be planted with something on your desk that has to be done yesterday. So having that adaptability to drop something and pick something else up, not miss deadlines, and be flexible in that you might do a whole big piece of work and then it might mean nothing because nothing goes ahead, or nothing comes of it, and not kind of being disheartened, but just taking it in, moving on to the next thing. So having that adaptability, flexibility. And I think for me, work ethic just can't be underestimated. I think that is such a huge thing that you can easily get across in your applications, in interviews. And I remember when I was applying for apprenticeships, I really felt like I didn't have much to offer, because I was doing my A-levels, I did an A-level in law, so I had that background. I'd done some work experience and I had a part-time job. But what I could show was my work ethic and how hard I would work if I got this job, how much I wanted to learn. Okay, I didn't know everything, but I'd be willing to learn everything and anything as quickly as I could. And that really made a huge difference. So I think if you are someone who has a really strong work ethic, which I think is needed for a career in law, then that's something to really focus on and draw out. And then I think lastly, just working well under pressure, not crumbling every time. It comes back to that kind of resilience point where you're going to probably have 5 or 6 more every day conflicting responsibilities that need to be prioritized, and you're going to have kind of pressure from a lot of different angles, and you should really be able to, if not thrive, just deal with that pressure. And that's something that you learn quite quickly, I think, when you enter the legal profession. But if you can display in advance that you can do that, or that you've had experience with that, then I think that would really make an application stand out as well. But I think all of the skills are kind of transferable from in-house to private practice. Maybe just the way that you use the skills is slightly different. And I think in-house you have a lot more emphasis on kind of that business knowledge and that commercial approach to things, rather than a kind of blank legal approach, which law firms shouldn't be taking anyway. But it's kind of when you're in-house and you're kind of on the front line, that's how you're expected to kind of deal with things.
Absolutely. That's really interesting to hear. Thanks so much. And I wanted to come to Aaron and Elliot now. So you're both trainee solicitors, but you have both had a wealth of experience in your life before you came into that current role. I think it would be great if we could hear from each of you one transferable skill that you picked up in your non-legal experience, which you've now found useful as a trainee solicitor. I don't know who wants to take this first.
I'll take it first, if that's okay, Elliot. So I think what Holly was saying probably is, well, I really agree with it in terms of the soft skills. So I'm not going to say one. I'm really sorry, Lydia. But in terms of soft skills, in terms of hard work, resilience, attention to detail, all of those types of things which you can learn in any job are very, very transferable to law. So anything that anyone on the call has done before, there'll be a way in which you can apply it to your new legal career. So that's what I'd say. Soft skills are really important.
Yeah, I'd echo that completely. Just to build a little bit on sort of specifically, I think Holly touched on it really eloquently in terms of how you deal with your client. I think when we're starting right now as trainee solicitors, when we think about who our client, you say client skills, who is our client? Even legal advice. Our client is our work provider, be it our supervisor, be it the work provider, the associate, the partner who has handed down a bit of work. So having a real focus on a customer service element to it, I think how can I make it as easy as possible for that person? How can I produce this work to as high quality as possible? How can I consider what the pressures on them are? How can I get it done within a certain time frame? That will really help you stand out, and that comes from the soft skills.
That's great. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing that and those skills. So on our panel this afternoon, we've got people coming at a legal career from all sorts of different angles. So I think hearing your insider insights into the application process is going to be very valuable. So I think what I'd like to do is start off by asking Jacob, what makes an application form stand out for good, and then also what are the common mistakes or missed opportunities that you see in CVs and application forms when they come through?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, what makes it stand out? I think it's good research, to be honest. It's good research and good self-understanding, because what we find is that 90% of applications are the same in terms of why they want to work here, why they want to work in commercial law. And I think it's where, people tend to just go onto a website and they're applying to obviously a lot of firms. So they're just pulling off the key things that they see and think, oh, great, this is what I'll talk about. But actually, you're not making yourself stand out because you're just going off with what a lot of other people are saying. So my advice to everyone is always think about what you actually want out of a career, what works for you. So do a bit of a deep dive into yourself almost and start thinking, do I want a firm where my working hours are longer? Do you want somewhere that is predominantly focused on an area of law specifically, or do you want somewhere that's full service? And once you start understanding and digging really into yourself and what you want, you'll then realize what you're going to try and find from each firm. So we get loads of applications. For example, they'll say, oh, I love that we have a B Corp accreditation for our sustainability commitments and everything. And candidates say that all the time, I'd love to work for you because you're B Corp status. But then I read that 90% of the time, so it doesn't stand out to me anymore. But what does stand out to me, for example, is a candidate I was talking to the other week at a law fair when they said, I'd love to work for you because you're B Corp. And I went, stop, tell me why before you put that on your form. And they explained to me that they themselves have a real passion and interest in environmental and sustainability. They are the president of a sustainability group at their university society. So actually, the reason for them makes sense, and it will then stand out because it brings in that personal loop to it. Like, they've chosen us because of their own passions, not just because it's something that should be impressive. And the same goes for any element. When you're talking about why a firm, why commercial law, you just really need to understand what that means to you and why those things stand out to you. Because as I always say, if it's personal to you, then it cannot be the same as anyone else's, because only you will have your own reasons, and therefore it will stand out in its own way. So that's the first kind of part to your question. Common mistakes, it's actually really simplistic. It's spelling, punctuation, and formatting. It's the easiest way at any firm, guaranteed, to make your application not stand out as much, because the minute we start to notice spelling errors throughout your application, or for example, if you're using really long paragraphs without breaking them down clearly, it becomes hard to read and digest for us as recruiters, and it just kind of means that your application is hindered, when actually the recommendation is, use Word, use spell checking tools. We as a firm also embrace the use of AI, if obviously when it's not completely writing the application, when it's just like fine tuning things, run it through a system like that. Friends, family can read them and spot these mistakes and errors and make sure it's readable for them. So it's one of those things that is an easier fix. So it's definitely a common mistake. We get people that call us barbers all the time, repeatedly, and you sit there and always think, I'm not barbers, I'm Brabners. But again, it's those little things that if that person hadn't have made that barber's mistake repeatedly throughout a form, then it wouldn't have been tainted. It wouldn't have been looked at as if to say, oh, they clearly don't even know our name. And it could have been a really strong one. So that's the easiest and most common mistake.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think everyone will be very, very interested to hear your insights. And Roy, if I could come to you next, you've been in and around the legal profession from multiple angles, working as a solicitor advocate before being senior tutor at BARBRI. So I'm interested to know how your experience as a solicitor advocate informs your current role at BARBRI.
Well, you put that very tactfully, Lydia. I've probably been in practice longer than the rest of the group put together. Well, first of all, people have talked about working long hours, pressure, hitting deadlines, and so on. I think being in practice and having had to deal with all that taught me some of the things I now teach: time management, project management, being able to handle, keeping all the balls in the air and keeping all the plates spinning. But most importantly, I think, is to see the broader picture. I was talking earlier on about clients' wants and client needs. And that's something that I've had to understand and appreciate in practice, and therefore I can pass that on in some of the teaching I do at BARBRI. I'm putting that legal decision in the business context, the point I was making earlier on, particularly if you're running your own practice, that comes home very, very quickly indeed. And also, I train a lot of advocates, and I spent every day of my career just about in court, and therefore hopefully I can pass on some of the tips and techniques and experiences that I've gained over those years. It's a very brief answer to the question, I hope, Lydia, but I'm conscious of the time.
Brilliant. And so, as you say, conscious of the time, we're moving on to our next set of questions, which are all about training and work experience. So I'm going to direct this first question to you again, Roy, if that's okay.
Sure.
And this question is, what are the key experiences that aspiring solicitors should seek out if they're looking to boost their CVs?
Well, actually, that's the slide that's come up. There's answered the question I saw in the chat box just now. Somebody asked about some of the courses I was mentioning earlier, our life skills courses, as we call them. You see some of them on screen there, and we've tried to make them manageable to meet those sort of skills. And if the next slide comes up, it'll give you a sort of potted. Yeah, it's exactly the things we've been talking about: business acumen, good communication, good management, and so on. And we have a package of courses which are masterclasses, as we call them. They're literally 90-minute sessions. They're live courses, and we do them over lunchtime, so usually from 12 to 1:30. They're very condensed because we pack an awful lot of information into 90 minutes. And again, it does what it says on the tin. It's a masterclass in those skills that's from the research we did previously, I mentioned, employers are looking for. And then we have a set of bite-sized courses as well, and there's some examples there on screen. These are effectively 5 or 6 hour courses. They're on demand, so there's no set time for those. You do it in your own time once you've signed up to take those courses, and meeting the skills that are being looked for. So that hopefully answers at least 2 questions in the box, saying, could we have an example of some of those classes? They're up on screen.
Absolutely. They sound like very valuable.
Just to give the sales pitch.
They sound like very valuable courses that are really relevant to the sort of things that we've been discussing today. So I'm sure everyone will be grateful to have had really concrete examples of the kinds of things you can do to boost your CV. And as we're drawing closer to 5 o'clock, I'd just like to wrap up this panel discussion with our final question, which I think I'm going to ask all the panelists, which is, what one piece of advice would you give to an aspiring lawyer or junior lawyer who are currently working on their applications? And for this, could I come to Aaron first?
Bearing in mind that people will, I imagine, be at different stages. So some people will have applied to 1 firm, 5 firms, 10 firms, sometimes 20, 30 firms. Just stay positive, keep going. That's it. Every application you get one closer, so eventually you'll get there.
That's great advice. Thank you so much. Elliot, could I come to you next?
Sure. I think mine's probably going to echo some of the things everyone's been saying, especially Jacob. That's just research. When I was working in sales, I used to make sometimes 200 cold calls a day, and I realised you're much better off putting the time and effort and focus into really mapping out 5 people and calling them, knowing exactly what they want, than 200 randomly. So yeah.
Holly, could I come to you next, please?
Yeah, so I think the other two are really, really important. And my addition would just be to stay genuine. Don't write what you think people want to hear. Really focus on something that's personal to you, and that that personal touch will really come through. And I'm now on the other side of kind of hiring people and carrying out interviews and application, reading for applications, conducting assessment centres, and that's the one thing that really stands out to me, is when someone has a genuine interest, and it's not just a kind of standard CV or a standard answer to a question that reads the same as everyone else. Just inject a little bit of personality. Don't be afraid to kind of be yourself.
Absolutely. I think that's really valuable advice. I'm also really interested, because you took the solicitor apprenticeship route, which was fairly new at the time and still is fairly new. What advice would you have for people who aren't sure whether the traditional university and training contract route is for them, or whether they should go with the solicitor apprenticeship? What would your advice be to those people who are trying to make up their mind?
I think about your current skills, what skills you want to have, and actually what you enjoy. So what I enjoyed and what I wanted at the time was to work and study. I didn't want to just do one thing at a time, but that really suits other people. So think about how you work the best. For me, it was to have a lot of competing, challenging priorities, and I wanted to learn really quickly. And I was ready at that time to enter the world of work. But some people aren't. So they go through the more kind of, university, then you work and do it all separately, which works for them. But for me, I really wanted to do it at the same time. And I was really interested in business and kind of learning that as I went. And also kind of think about your future career. Are you sure that you want to do law? Do you maybe want to do a non-law degree and then transition into law like Elliot did? There's a lot of different routes that you can take now. So I think just have a think about what you want long term, but also what you want now and what you're thinking about now, and what you're good at. And that really kind of helped me to make my decision. And I ended up not applying to university at all, because I was so sure that I wanted to take the solicitor apprenticeship route to qualification.
That's great. Thank you so much. I'll come to you next, Jacob. What would be your advice for aspiring solicitors?
My advice would be, so like I said earlier, do your research, work out why you want to work somewhere. If you do think, yeah, that place looks good, looks right for me, then just get involved where you can. A lot of firms will offer insight days. They do virtual events. Loads of us do loads of virtual events now, to be fair. I mean, we're like all of us here today as well, talking about our firms, and there's all sorts going on. So just get involved where you can, because then when you're saying in your application, why do you want to work there, you can almost use these as little examples. We get it a lot, but it is impactful at the end result when you can say, even if, for example, you're on here today and you say, oh, I watched this Legal Cheek CV conversation, Jacob inspired me to work at Brabner's. Luckily I don't assess, so it's fine, but it just adds that extra level of, like, you've cleared on your research, you've clearly thought about why, and you've got that additional motivator. But again, appreciating that not everyone can access, full insight days and whatnot. But that's why firms like us, for example, we have offerings like these where we do these talks that are virtual and accessible. We do virtually insight evenings now, and everything's at different time. All of our events, they're never just at 4 o'clock each one. They're one's at 12, one's at 3, one's at 4, whatnot. So no matter where you are or who you are, at some point you should be able to get access to the firm. So yeah, just get involved where you can and meet people. I think that's the best advice I can give.
That's great. And finally, Roy, what would be your advice?
Well, I used to see an awful lot of CVs as an employer, and to be blunt, many were much of a muchness, and I could almost skip through the first 3/4 of it, dealing with their academic qualifications, education, etc. And what I was looking for was, what could they bring to the firm that was different, apart from their qualification? What did they do? And there's some great examples from some of the other panelists talking about their route to qualification. What is their experience outside of law that gives them that worldly wisdom, if I can put it that way, to look at all the things we've been talking about, the wider picture, the business angle, and so on. So not just the qualification. What is there something extra about you that will make you attractive to a firm?
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing all those valuable pieces of advice with us this afternoon, along with your knowledge on how we can supercharge our CVs. This brings us to the end of the panel discussion, but as I mentioned in the introduction, we'll now be moving on to a networking session, which will run until 5:30 p.m. The event is not over yet, so please don't go anywhere. Thank you so much to our audience for tuning in. You can head to the networking booths to ask all your further questions to our speakers by clicking on Expo on the sidebar on the left-hand side of your screen. Thank you so much for joining us.